So let me continue in our program. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Bahar, Namaki, Araghi from ITS Denmark with a very interesting presentation, especially up to date. It's resilience of a smart city with focus on communities' health, uh, uh, inclusiveness, and accessibility. So, Bahar, floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for your invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and join the Smart City Symposium Prague for the second time. I hope everyone can see my presentation and my voice is clear, right? Great. So today I'm going to talk about resilience of a smart city with focus on community health, inclusiveness, and accessibility. My name is Bahar. I'm an associate at Arab and also a member of ITS Denmark for a couple of years. My focus currently is on smart mobility and intelligent transportation, but I will start in my presentation a bit broader and try to focus with some examples on the transportation and how we could actually try to be more resilient in that aspect. COVID-19 and the dimension and extent of its impact is quite clear to everybody. I think every one of us now realize it quite well. But what's interesting in terms of the COVID is that cities might have boundaries in terms of their legal and political aspect, and countries definitely have clear boundaries. But we have all experienced that an invisible virus can fly around all the boundaries and kind of create an effect and also an impact on our day-to-day life and business. So when we are acting globally and functioning globally, we have to start thinking beyond the legal, political, and also social boundaries of our cities, our countries, and so on. This was a very clear example that we were not resilient enough to address COVID in the first place and try to minimize the impacts of it so that it not becomes such a global pandemic or global impact on everybody's life. One thing that we have been trying to work on for very many years was the City Resilience Index. Cities are quite different, they are quite unique in terms of their design, their layout of social, and in terms of economy, in terms of the environment, and all the aspects. So theoretically there's been a lot of frameworks among those one in the right hand side that we try to kind of measure how each city was and is resilient so that you can have a baseline to see how far from the actual case it is, because this is not the last sort of unexpected future case that come. So we all know that there are natural, there are man-made, catastrophic, but what was even more interesting in terms of the COVID is how these can have a domino effect. So not only one aspect, but the other aspects can actually create a more bigger impact than what we were experiencing. To make that a bit more clearer is that like we have seen COVID in almost all around the world, but different cities have responded in a very different way. So we could have also seen that the resilience of the cities have been quite diverse in terms of how quickly and how flexibly they can address the COVID, which there was a lot of parameters. One is in terms of level of development, how developed is that city or that urban context, and how quickly they were able to accommodate the situation, population, the social mix, economy, and also scale of economy and scale of digitalization. They were all aspects that we have seen how different cities try to react to the COVID and respond to the COVID. However, after a while, like maybe in the first few months, as the reactions of different cities were quite different. But when we go with the time, so you can see that all the policies and actions were kind of converging to be very similar. Lockdown policies, social distancing, regulations on testing, and so on. So it came as a surprise in the beginning and kind of diverse, but then later on we could see that globally all of us were kind of trying to do same thing, slightly different but same thing. And this is a kind of a lesson learned to take with us, because what we realize is that although all the cities are in a different level of smartness, by smartness, I mean like the level of digital infrastructure you have in place, the level of use of data for efficiency, for traffic management, for infrastructure management, and many other aspects, health and education. But what we realized is that Although the technology is the enabler, but we have to start thinking more smart and invest in a more smart way. Some of the layers of a smart city, let's say energy, health, transportation, education, they were more advanced than the other one, or they were more resilient than the other one. And you could see that different cities, because of these differences on their layer of resilience, they were actually to accommodate the COVID faster or slower, with less impact or more impact. And this is the things that we have to take away from what we learned from this situation. For instance, we have seen that technology and big data was a big asset for wide range of cities globally. We have seen that having these access to the apps, having the access to the data, location of people, how they are moving, how they are using the infrastructure, they all helped us to be able to have a real-time surveillance of situation of COVID. Where is the COVID most focused on? Where it is expanding? How it is spreading around? And we were able actually to monitor the risk, inform the people of that district that are in the more risk, try to come up with trial and error policies or actions that could actually avoid COVID spreading to the other places, and then also be able to test our scenarios and see whether this scenario is more impactful or the other one. And this way of sort of reactive and active sort of resilience and management of the situation were not possible if we didn't have data, if we didn't have big data aspect and also all these sensor technologies that are in place in most cities. So we could say actually that the technology development was actually the key in managing the situation. Again, some cities were better than the others, but at the end of the story, we could see that everyone was trying to rely on data, rely on decision making tools, monitor the situation. And this is all connected to the IoT that is basically Internet of Things for us. Pictures on the right hand side, I think it's not a surprise for most of you. We were seeing that cities and infrastructure were in some cases very resilient. They quickly accommodated the COVID situation and tried to continue operation, whereas in this other cases there was basically no, it completely shut down and it completely couldn't respond to the situation. Similar cases when it comes to the events, when it comes to the education, when it comes to the crowdsourcing and crowd management, we could see that we were not able to accommodate it very quickly. But by the time we try to learn using the hygiene masks, using the social distances, so we try to kind of accommodate the situation more and more. But one of the aspects that was quite affected was transportation in general, especially people transportation rather than the goods transportation. So we were all experiencing stations being empty, trains being empty, buses being empty, and a quite big impact on the public transport for majority of city, primarily because of the way it is designed and because of this virus specific aspect that it was about distance and social distancing. However, COVID is hopefully soon gone or controlled in a best way, but the lesson is there. So we need to think about the cities and infrastructure in a more resilient way for any cases that is coming in the future. What we realized is that the public health and safety is one of the very, very most dominant and key aspects of any successful, smart, and resilient city. We can't predict the future. We don't know what is next, but we know that if we are not resilient against the public health and safety, we can't operate. We really have to take this in a next level. So one of the things that we think that although COVID has affected many of us globally very negatively, very many, many aspects, but it is a driver of a change. So if we take a step back and look at what we have gone through over the last year, we really need to rethink about what we have done good and what we have not done so well, and how can we actually reposition what we are doing in the future to better be ready for any unexpected situation. One thing that I would like to emphasize is that we need to zoom in and we need to zoom out from many aspects. We have to zoom in our communities, small districts, neighborhoods, what's working well under COVID in there and what is not working in there. So try to spot that, try to collect the information while we are in it, and then learn from that and see what we can actually do to improve it. Then we need to zoom out a little bit and see how our cities are functioning, how our regions are functioning, And since we are globally connected, how could we actually be better in a more smart and global world rather than just thinking about within the boundaries of our countries? We are trading globally, we are flying globally, we are functioning globally. So we can't actually ignore that aspect any longer. So I may be sitting in Copenhagen today, but I'm affected by something happening in the rest of the world day to day. So this is a very, very big lesson learned for us as engineers and as designers, that how and what can we actually do to make this more flexible and ready. We really need to readjust the application of things that we are building or putting in place, both in terms of infrastructure that are physical and also digital infrastructure that we are putting in place. By that, for instance, I can give you an example that is it possible to make a school in a more flexible way that we can use it for maybe a clinic if we need in a short time? Is a parking lot possible to be something else if we need to change that for a shorter time? To give you some example is that by this, what I want to show you is that, like, we don't know what's next. We don't know what's upstairs stairs in this picture. We don't know what is future coming from. But we are definitely sure that we have seen that the smart technologies have helped us a lot during COVID. We really learned how to use it in a more flexible way, but there is a long way to go for unknowns of the future. I try to kind of focus on three aspects, which is very much related to the transportation, as it was one of the sectors that has been mostly affected during the COVID, both the local transportation and also the international aspect of it with aviation and so on. So there's a couple of questions to ask basically. One is that what are the ways that we can promote active and sustainable transportation in a more flexible and agile manner? We all agree that we can't build roads and we can't even create more space sometimes in the cities while we are basically fighting with a disease like COVID. But also, we need to think that maybe we don't need that much change in the future. So a lot of cities realize that public transport may or may not be enough for the future needs. A lot of cities were car driven before COVID, but because of the social aspect of the COVID and because of the health, we realized that the bike and walking needs to be more prioritized. But in such a short time window, no cities could really build new spaces for cyclists to make it safe and promote it enough. So, one way of doing this is to look at the technology and what we can actually achieve and create space using the technology. In that example on the right hand side, I'm just showing you a space within Copenhagen, one of the streets. This street is one of the examples that we could actually, by installing some sensor technology that could source the crowd, and also by some variable message signs or some signs that can digitally inform people, we could have actually assigned space to people for walking or cycling due to the COVID and due to any time of the day that we have more needs on people walking and cycling rather than just having this space for car but empty. So this is just some examples that in current intelligent transport systems, we have sensors that are able to detect and are able to communicate the messages. And with some, for instance, a smart street lighting, you could actually communicate this message clearly to the user and ensure a safe and a convenient commute for them, rather than putting blocks of betons or crossing and blocking the streets in a more sort of hardware side of it. So this is one of the examples that could be very much useful in any city. The other aspect is that information is key, and we realize that having access to the mobile phone app and being able to communicate the information with the user, we will able actually to really combat COVID to quite a big extent. In this aspect also, I think that we have to try to use the information by in a clever way to really influence the people and change their behavior while they are in the need for commuting with bike and active travel. Let's say they can actually make this a way of like day-to-day travel rather than something for short time and then going back to their cars afterwards. So information is key, and that can be collected by many means of sensor technology across the cities. Other aspect is that you have to really make sort of systems and services designed for the user. Information, the surface, the space that you want to create for them, and the experience you want to give them should be actually accommodated based on the existing technology and also be very well thought through. Otherwise, it is a change for short time, but it will not last forever. One of the examples is that we know that anybody, if you're pushing for active travel and if you're pushing for sustainable transportation, we need to really think that from a user perspective. In this case, for instance, like anybody who wants to cycle wants to have a clean, safe, and a hygiene parking for their bike so that it's not affecting them more. So one example could be, for instance, the one shows on the top is that we create a sort of a automatic bicycle parkings that are safe, hygiene, you can charge it and you can reserve your space before you make your trip. Or it can be like dynamic urban space for short-term and long-term applications. One of the most other questions that we kind of came across from many cities is that public transport is one of the sectors that has been extremely affected by COVID due to the space design of the interior fleet and also the way that it's been used before. So now we are slowly getting back to the day-to-day business and people are encouraged to come back to work or education and so on. But the public transport is still suffering a little bit from the confidence of getting people safely from A to B. So, what can be done actually in that sense? So, while we are promoting the active travel, we cannot just look at active travel as an isolated silo and then the public transport another silo and so on and so on. So, we really need to integrate them as one public transport or transport system. In this example, I wanted to show you some of the designs that is based on including and incorporating the bike system into the public transport system so that the people who are living in longer distances can actually use their bike and partially use the public transport and get to their destinations or origin. It gives enough space for people to sit, it gives enough space for people to be able to carry their bike and also have a safe and hygiene situation while they're transporting. And also by, for instance, giving flexibility in the platforms, you can have longer trains to stop there from the beginning and also make sure that is quite demand responsive. Different time of the day, you need longer or shorter trains to come and go. And same can be for the buses. The other aspect is that we have learned that sometimes with the small initiatives, we were able to manage the public transport in a very safe manner. So what we learned today can be a lesson learned for the future of the fleet design. Can we actually make the seats more safe or people sitting in directions that they are not necessarily imposing any risk of health to each other? So that's one of the other aspects that hopefully can create a better um, picture of the public transport in short and mid-term to bring the confidence back again and people can use it more often. But we all know that future is unknown and there is no way that we can be 100% sure no matter what we are doing. But one thing that we have learned is that although we are within the boundaries of our community, city, and region, but since we are working and sort of functioning internationally and globally, we have to really think about some level of integrity. And by that, I mean, like, for instance, aviation sector, tourism sector, they are quite global sectors. So we could see that they are the most affected one as one of the most affected one, at least currently. But how can we actually make that be resilient for the long run? How we can actually make sure that all these leisure, tourism, aviation, and so on are seen in a holistic way so that if something, again, risky such as COVID or a similar one might happen, we are more resilient against it. One of the things that is more and more becoming evident is that the post COVID leadership. We have been quite reactive to the COVID. If in the first time or first few weeks that we have detected COVID, we were taking it more from a proactive manner, maybe that virus wouldn't expand or spread so far away and it would have been locally solved. It is clear for us that we can't ignore anything happening in any part of the world from now on. It could be next day my problem, your problem. So this is the way that information and technology can really, really help. So if you're experiencing similar situations in the future, I'm pretty sure that the political leaders will react to it in a very different manner than what we did. But this has to also be a way of thinking for us as engineers and designers and service providers, that we need to design our services with a more risk-based approach. How should I design a public transport? How should I design a bike station? How should I design a shopping center or a education center that is already safe and the risk for any kind of interaction with other services is minimized? How can we have, for instance, create access control for accessing a building which doesn't need you to touch anything? It can be possible with as easy app nowadays, but we didn't thought through it well in advance when we were hit by the COVID. And the intercorrelation between of the risk of different services should be more and more focused on when we are going forward from this. One other aspect is that the concept of inclusiveness, we have to think about the whole society and we have to think about all the applications in one. But also, we have to try to focus that communities played a key role under the pandemic. The concepts such as 15-minute city become more and more evident for many cities globally, but this is something that in North Europe we already are implementing. Cities within 5 to 10 minutes, areas within 5 to 10 minutes are quite self-sufficient. There are shops, there are health, there are education, there are transport. So this has to become a very, very important pillar for our future city and urban planning. And the solidarity of this community has to be really emphasized. And how with digital systems can we create that and emphasize on that is something that is becoming more key for the future service design. How can I make something that fits this society better, fits this community better, and be more customized while looking at the bigger space and zooming out on more cohesion and also sort of interoperability between the layers. One thing that one thing that we should say is that the underlying inequalities should be met. We cannot have cities that have areas that are very highly advanced and areas that are less. So that gap has to be addressed quickly. And also we have to think about the new institution, new economy ways that can make us more resilient for any future unknowns. And also the integrity of different layers of urban, region, national, and global. How can we make that happen? And also how we can actually use the COVID for triggering the behavior chain and lifestyle chain for a longer run. One thing that I think for me is important is that technology was a key in this aspect for us to realize where are the risks and how are the risks. How can we make these technologies more accessible, the data more accessible, and provided for the decision maker to say how could we actually manage a space, for instance, to be more safe and hygiene and still the city should function, the urban should function. And also the flexibility of the applications when we are building or rebuilding any infrastructure should be taken more serious. That was my presentation, and thanks for your time and attention.
Thank you very much for your nice presentation, and I'm looking forward for future cooperation within different possibilities through our universities or through our ITS association. So, Bahar, once again, thank you very much for participation
Thank you very much.
for the second time in our Smart City Symposium. Have a nice day and bye bye.
Pleasure and have a nice day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.